In the history of the ancient world there were many great and worthy people. Some of them can be associated with a whole era of events and transformations: Gaius Marius, Sulla, Hannibal, King Mithridates. The hero of our today's narration not only entered history as a politician and conqueror, but also left to descendants very valuable historical information in the form of detailed books about the Gauls, Germans and his military campaigns. In general, about Gaius Julius Caesar can be said the following: without him there would not be the Rome that we all know about. The name Julius Caesar is no doubt familiar to everyone. The great Roman general, politician and writer is probably the most famous person from all of ancient history. Caesar's name is familiar even to those who have bypassed the history of antiquity. Julius Caesar boasted a truly divine origin. Rod Julius, even if not the richest and most influential, led its history from Julius Ascanius, son of Aeneas, grandson of Venus, great-grandson of Jupiter. Many representatives of the family at different times held prominent government positions. Caesar from an early age enthusiastically studied Latin and Greek language, rhetoric and oratory. His teacher was a Gaul. It is believed that it was in communication with him the descendant of the gods of Olympus began to prepare for the main business of his life, the Gallic campaign, without which the Romanization of the lands west of the Alps would not have taken place, and the history of mankind would be deprived of such a country as France. Like all Romance languages, French traces its lineage back to Latin. Julius Caesar's career began as a military aide to Marcus Minucius Turnus, the governor of the province of Asia. Upon his return to Rome, Julius contracted his first marriage at his father's instruction. Subsequently, he would enter into marriage more than once more. Caesar, being a descendant of an aristocratic family, got into the proscription lists of Sulla and was forced to leave Italy in a hurry in Cilicia, where he joined a military campaign against pirates organized by the governor Publius Servilius. Caesar was not able to return to Rome, and after the death of Sulla, as in power again were his enemies, he fled to Asia, where he was captured by pirates and locked up in one of the Cilician fortresses. Pirates were the first defeated enemies of the future commander, having paid them off collected from relatives and friends the sum of 20 talents. Caesar hired ships and crews in Miletus and cruelly dealt with their offenders, returning the ransom. It is believed that while in pirate captivity, the young Caesar entertained himself and the overseers by composing poetry. But the latter Roman poetry did not penetrate, as Caesar himself claimed. Cilician his youthful graphomania did not like. Caesar was again in Rome and concluded a political marriage with the granddaughter of Sulla, Pompey. However, given the mores of the time, this union Caesar did not oblige to anything. For numerous and versatile sexual relations, he managed to get the nickname, the husband of all women and the wife of all husbands. Subsequently, remaining true to his views, the commander will flirt with everyone from the Gaulish women to the Queen of Egypt, for which the soldiers called Caesar, bald lecher. Of course, in jest, during the campaigns he enjoyed tremendous support and respect of the army. However, within the walls of Rome, the extraordinary popularity of Gaius Julius among the fair sex caused only hatred on the part of the aristocracy. Caesar not only undermined the privileges of the Roman elite, but also seduced their wives. Thus, Pompey divorced his wife because of her connection with Caesar, and Cato's cousin Servilia was the most loyal of the mistresses of the future dictator for life. Creating a portrait of the young Julius Caesar, we imagine more of a reckless party boy than a consistent politician. Only accumulated experience with age and growing responsibility from year to year will make him one of the most outstanding people in history. Involved in the political intrigues of Rome, Caesar began by bringing to trial a former supporter of Sulla, Gnaeus Dolabella, who had gotten dirty during the times of proscription and repression of the aristocracy. The panel of judges did not support the prosecution, but Caesar achieved popular respect for his speeches and democratic rhetoric. He did not seek to compete in eloquence with his opponents or to take the example of the great orators of his time, e.g., the great Cicero. Without sympathizing with such an Asian style, Caesar cultivated a courageous brevity and severe simplicity, which can be perfectly traced in his later writings. Simple, concise language, understandable to both educated patrician and commoner. In 68 BC, Julius Caesar was elected quaestor, assistant consul, and sent to serve in Spain. During his service, Caesar led military raids against local tribes, ravaging their settlements and collecting booty. Nevertheless, he earned the gratitude of Spanish cities allied to Rome by the widespread spread of Roman law and lower interest rates on Roman loans. Legends say that engaged Caesar saw the statue of Alexander the Great and reproached himself that Alexander to his age has already managed to conquer half of the Mediterranean, and Caesar himself has not yet boasted of anything. Returning to Rome, Gaius Julius with redoubled vigor engaged in a struggle for honorable magistrate positions. In 65 he was elected aedile, responsible for public works. He won the popularity of the Romans, decorating the city with columns and new buildings, entertained the citizens with impeccable games. Caesar returned to the Forum the trophies of Marius, previously removed by order of Sulla. By all his actions, he indicated a desire for revolutionary change in the Republic. Soon, Caesar was in trouble with his creditors. Making his way to public office and decorating the city, he owed the sum of 25 million sesterces, and creditors opposed his sending the propraetor to Spain. Try to find another debtor in those wild lands. However, Caesar's career was saved by the richest man in Rome, Marcus Licinius Crassus, who signed over all his debts. During the Spanish campaign, Caesar was able to conduct several successful military operations and not only paid off his debts, but also enriched the Roman treasury, for which he was honored with a triumph. Caesar needed to win consular elections to continue his career. He enlisted Gnaeus Pompey on the side of the Democrats, a great political move. Pompey had just returned from the East after a series of successful diplomatic and military campaigns and had become one of Rome's richest citizens, almost on par with the aforementioned Crassus. However, the Senate was frightened by Pompey's return. Many senators were inclined to see him as the new Sulla, since the Pompeian army that had landed in Brundisium could well proclaim its commander dictator. The Senate refused to ratify the agreements concluded by Pompey with the rulers of Bithynia, Pontus, Syria and Palestine, and most importantly, refused to grant land to the veterans of the legions. Again, Rome faced the agrarian question, which caused revolution and civil war. Together with Pompey and Crassus, Caesar created the first triumvirate, which became a serious political force. Pompey agreed to support Caesar for his help in implementing proposals rejected by the Senate. Caesar was elected consul of Rome, along with the opposition Bibulus, who played virtually no role in decision-making. As we all remember, the consular magistracy gave the holder of the post almost royal powers. Caesar has not yet had time to take his consular post, as brought to the consideration of the proposals of Pompey the distribution of land between 20,000 of the poorest citizens, the approval of the agreements concluded by Pompey in the East, the reduction of taxes from the Asian provinces for a third. Of course, the Senate rejected all these proposals, and, probably, this is the reaction Caesar expected from the senators. He went straight to the People's Assembly, formerly the highest legislative body, which adopted all the projects of Pompey. The next high-profile initiative of the new consul was also adopted, bypassing the decision of the Senate. Caesar proposed to grant land to poor families with more than 3 children. At the end of his consular term, Caesar appointed himself governor of Cisalpine and Narbonne Gaul for the next 5 years. This was a step toward his subsequent European campaigns. A curious case occurred with Caesar's supporter Publius Clodius Pulchus, the young aristocrat, who betrayed his class to fight for the rights of the poor, liked not only Caesar's policy, but also his wife. Clodius infiltrated her in female attire at the festive ceremonies of the good goddess, was exposed and accused of desecrating the mysteries of the goddess. Caesar denied the accusations against his aide, but with his wife Pompey subsequently divorced. Because Caesar publicly commented on his decision, "My wife should be above suspicion." With this decision he did not rehabilitate, but neither did he condemn his close aide. The first consulship of Gaius Julius Caesar was truly historic. After a century of agrarian revolution, ideas of the brothers Gracchus finally triumphed. Land began to be distributed free of charge among Roman citizens, which began to relieve the heaviest social tensions. The second consul, Bibulus, did not show from his house and sluggishly opposed the reforms, usually announcing that the signs are unfavorable, and instead of the traditional, the year of the consulship of Caesar and Bibulus, was nicknamed by Roman jokers, the year of the consulship of Julius and Caesar. Our hero for the first time received in his hands almost sole power. In passing, it should be noted that in passing Caesar invented the first newspaper in history, the Daily Gazette, which published Senate debates, news and legislative acts. The sheets were copied, posted on the walls of forums and distributed to different corners of the state. The crazy young man, a lover of risk, wine and women, was gradually replaced by a statesman who prepared Rome for the transition from the republican system to the principate, a kind of monarchy. During the early years of his political career, Julius Caesar successfully passed through the main administrative positions, becoming famous for his irreconcilable struggle with rival conservatives. In 59 BC, he was elected consul and introduced a number of reforms popular among Romans. Public work made of windy hangdog mature and judicious politician, but truly historical fame. Caesar brought his European conquests and subsequent return to Rome, which led to civil war. Toward the end of his consular term, Caesar appointed himself governor of Cisalpine and Narbonne Gaul, and immediately began his new duties. It is worth noting that the governor's tasks included more than just dealing with the boring administrative matters of the region. In fact, he became the representative of the Republic, its word and its sword. Given that the north of Italy was very turbulent in those days, the new governor had to conduct more than one military campaign. In previous years, Chief Ariovistus had brought 15,000 Germans to Gaul at the request of a local tribe for help. After providing the required assistance against his neighbors, he began his conquest of the Gallic lands. One of the Celtic tribes, Edui, appealed to Rome for protection, and the Senate authorized the governor of Narbonne Gaul to provide this assistance. Simultaneously with the growing threat from Ariovistus, and he already thought he was the leader of all the Gauls, the migration of the Helvetians began. They gathered on a journey from the territory of present-day Geneva westward, crossing Narbonne Gaul. Upon assuming his new post, Caesar faced serious problems and pondered how to keep the Republic from invading barbarians, but within the walls of Rome, insidious conspiracies were weaving against him. As during his consulship, Caesar did not bother to negotiate with the Senate. He strengthened the army at his own expense and declared war on both Ariovistus and Helvets. In a heavy battle at Bibracte, the Helvetians were defeated. Caesar allowed them to return to their homeland on condition that their country came under Roman rule. The whole of Gaul welcomed the victor and asked for help in expelling Ariovistus. Romans defeated dangerous neighbors near Ostheim. Ariovistus himself fled and soon died. Despite the friendly attitude to the barbarians, Caesar's goal was not the liberation of Gaul, but its conquest. He immediately began to reorganize the tribes under Roman rule, explaining that there was no other way to protect them from the Germans. Of course, not all the Gauls were not in agreement with this policy, and a wave of bloody clashes swept through the Gallic lands. Caesar promptly attacked the Gaulish villages and defeated opponents one by one, not allowing tribes to unite forces. In 56, Caesar prematurely declared the conquest of Gaul, and the Senate solemnly declared the territory a Roman province. Prone to imperialism, Romans fervently supported the conqueror. Julius himself returned to the governor's residence and sent Pompey and Crassus an offer to meet and discuss political plans. Further strategy of the former triumvirate included the extension of Caesar's powers for another 5 years, the appointment of Pompey and Crassus as consuls in Spain and Syria respectively. As was the custom of the time, everything was decided by bribery and the Romans' favorite urban beautification. By building public buildings for the entertainment of the citizens, it was easy to win elections. Caesar was able to continue his Gallic conquests. His goal was to convince the barbarians that peace, albeit under Roman rule, was better than war. Thus, Caesar was able to establish a secure border along the Rhine, defeating the Germans at Xanten and making 2 reconnaissance sorties into Britain. The islands of foggy Albion beckoned not only rumors of untold riches accumulated by their leaders, but also ore deposits. In addition, the British had previously provided assistance to the Gauls who had rebelled against Rome, which was seen as the presence of a potential enemy on the borders of the Republic. Caesar was kept from a large-scale British campaign by the extremely turbulent situation on the mainland. In 53 he crushed the Eburonian revolt and returned to Italy. The leader Vercingetorix united almost all the Gallic tribes against Rome. Caesar's position was aggravated by the fact that most of his army was concentrated in northern Gaul while he himself was in the south. Here he was helped by military cunning. A small detachment of Romans besieged Auvergne, then drew away the barbarians Vercingetorix. Caesar and a few companions managed to sneak north, where he united with the army and immediately ordered an offensive. The Romans captured Avaricus and Cenabus, but were stopped at Gergovia, meeting fierce resistance from the Gauls. From the support of Caesar refused once saved Idui, who decided to push him into Narbona, Gaul. At this tense moment, Caesar decided to take a risk. With an army of 30,000 he laid siege to Alesia, where with an equal force was Vercingetorix. Just beginning the siege, the commander learned that from the north in support of the Gauls moving army of 250,000 people. Caesar ordered to build 2 walls, one between the siege camp and the city, the second, around his army. The Romans resisted until the barbarian hordes disintegrated into several independent units that did not observe discipline, and the city began to starve. Then Vercingetorix decided to surrender the city and surrender to the mercy of the victor. The leader himself was chained and taken to Rome as an ornament of Caesar's triumph. The capture of Alesia not only raised Caesar to new heights of glory. Rome subjugated the entire territory of modern France, which was almost twice the size of Italy, opening new markets and postponing the barbarian invasion for another 400 years. For several centuries the Gallic lands were under Roman control. The Latin language, Roman law, all this became the foundation for subsequent European civilization. History can be extremely ironic. It was Gaius Julius Caesar who founded the Europe we all know. During his European campaign, Caesar proved himself to be an invincible military leader. Rome, which remembered his profligacy and political cunning, was amazed at this change. On the real amazement of the Roman aristocracy caused literary works of Caesar. In his usual brief and concise manner, in the Commentaries, he set out not only the history of his conquests, but also the life of the Germans. This work is still one of the most sought-after materials on the ancient Germanic people. While Caesar continued his victorious march across the continent, Roman political circles were going through bad times. Without too much exaggeration, we can say that they plunged into the abyss of the most brazen corruption and incessant violence. Roman democracy was collapsing according to the formula written by Plato: freedom turns into permissiveness, and chaos leads to loss of freedom. No small part in this was played by Pompey and Crassus, whom Caesar helped to become consuls. According to their plans, Crassus was to conquer Armenia and the Parthian kingdom. Pompey, to put at the feet of Rome far Spain. However, both of them were not as successful as Julius Caesar. Crassus, towards the end of his consular term, gathered an army of recruits and marched into Syria. There he was defeated by the Parthians at Carrhae, lost his army and his own son. However, his own fate was even worse. Crassus was despicably killed in negotiations with the Parthian commander, and his head was sent for fun to the Parthian court, to represent the head of Pentheus in the production of Bacchanalia by Euripides. Pompey, for his part, never made it to the campaign. After the death of his wife Julia, he lost the last thread linking him to Caesar. Pompey also refused offers to strengthen the alliances with new marriage. Caesar was ready to give away his friend's niece Octavia, and himself asked for the hand of Pompey's daughter. But the marriages were not to be consummated. Pompey decided to stand in the struggle with Caesar for power, siding with the conservatives. The social life of Rome demanded change. The capital had been saved from the barbarians, but was itself on the verge of chaos. Agonizing democracy was buying votes, selling provinces and offices. Blackmail, assassination and plain urban robbery flourished. Poor people from all corners of the state flocked to the city for a better life. The right to vote was given selectively only to those who were willing to give it in the interests of the authorities. Amidst the systemic crisis, there was simply no political or police force interested in order and capable of bringing it about. Pompey did not fail to take advantage of the precarious situation. He brought an army into Rome and dispersed the rebellious plebs by demanding that the Senate appoint himself consul without a comrade. This wording no doubt sounded better than dictator. He enacted a series of reforms against corruption and cracked down on gangs. But he also abolished consular elections for politicians absent from the city. That is, Caesar. The city came to terms with Pompey's dictatorship and there was a brief lull. Everyone awaited the return of Julius Caesar. The commander himself no longer believed in the Republic and realized that he would have to restore order himself, stepping over his former friends. Caesar's powers ended in March 49, at which time he lost his immunity. To enter the struggle for consulship he could only in the fall of the same year, but, given the power of detractors, he would hardly be allowed to do so. Thus, Caesar had to choose between voluntary exile from Italy and knowingly lost trial. The Senate demanded from the commander to dissolve the legions, his only strength and support. Caesar tried to preserve diplomatic relations to the last. In the end, he even proposed the simultaneous removal from office of himself and Pompey. The idea found support in the Senate, but Pompey blocked the proposal. As a result, the Senate announced that Caesar must relinquish command, otherwise he would be declared an enemy of society. Caesar responded by asking to keep 1 legion out of 9 and to extend his powers for a year. Otherwise, war. Caesar hesitated for a long time before making an important decision. On the one hand, he had no formal rights not to fulfill the decisions of the Senate. On the other hand, the actions of the Senate could ruin Rome, because even civil war is not as destructive as incompetence and reactionaries in power. Caesar addressed the soldiers of his favorite 13th Legion and asked if they were ready to support him. The commander's authority was so great that not a single legionary refused. On January 10, 49, Caesar crossed the Rubicon, the river delineating the southern border of Cisalpine Gaul. The die was cast, according to legend, pronounced the future dictator for life, as he headed for Rome with a single legion. Civil war became inevitable. In the previous notes we rightly called Caesar a historical, epical personality. Europe, and perhaps the whole world, without the accomplishments of this great commander and politician would not be as we know it. Caesar wrote history with his own hands, imposing his rules on the world. This requires not only making serious decisions, but also taking responsibility for them. One such momentous decision was crossing the Rubicon, the river that served as the border between Italy and Cisalpine Gaul, which effectively meant declaring war on Rome. Caesar refused to obey the criminal decisions of the Senate and led his loyal soldiers directly to the capital, intending to bring the state out of the political crisis with his own forces. Gaius Julius Caesar, together with a legion of soldiers loyal to him, crossed the northern frontiers of the Republic. This act seemed completely reckless. Caesar finally cut off the way to a peaceful and legal solution to the conflict with the Senate. In Rome itself, Gnaeus Pompey the Great gathered an army of 10 legions, that is, no less than 60,000 soldiers, and remaining in the hands of the Pompeians resources of the treasury allowed to put under the arms of the same number. Moreover, from the history of the Punic Wars we remember that Rome could not take by force even Hannibal. So what did the overconfident Caesar count on? Caesar's 9 legions were in Gaul and could come to the aid of their leader no sooner than in a few weeks, but in the plans of Gaius Julius did not include a full-scale war in Italy. Instead of flooding the Republic of rivers of blood, like Mary or Sulla, he tried with all his might to win the favor of the Roman citizens. Already in Italy, Caesar replenished his army. 2 legions joined at Picena and Corfinia, 2 more were assembled from prisoners, volunteers and recruits. But even such an army did not have to fight desperately for every inch of Roman land. The cities opened their gates to them. Moving inland, Caesar behaved not as a ruthless conqueror, but as a just and magnanimous ruler. He strictly ordered the army not to harm the citizens and their property, refused to ruin rich estates, although he himself after the Gallic campaign was left almost penniless. Caesar realized that he needed the support of all segments of Roman society, from wealthy patricians to the urban plebs. In addition, Caesar declared his friends all those who will take a neutral side, which was in itself an elegant political move. The Romans well remembered that Sulla proscriberovania even those who remained neutral in relation to the struggle sullies with the followers of Maria. At the same time Caesar did not abandon attempts to negotiate with the Senate. With each new success, he took more and more steps to keep Rome out of civil war. In letters to Cicero, Caesar stated that he was ready to retire if he was guaranteed safety. But even Cicero was powerless before the intolerant dogmatism of the parties, an indispensable companion of revolutions. Fortunately for all, the battle for the capital was not to be fated. Despite the obvious numerical advantage, Gnaeus Pompey and supported him Respublicantes left Rome before the arrival of Caesarians. They believed that the young and undisciplined army is not yet ready to face the veterans of the Gallic campaigns, and transported soldiers across the Adriatic. The Roman fleet, under Pompey's rule, was to isolate Italy, leaving Caesar without supplies and the city itself without a supply of food from Africa and Asia. Following Pompey, many loyal aristocrats left the capital. Unlike Caesar, Pompey adhered to the principle of, "He who is not with us is against us." On March 16, 49, Caesar entered Rome unimpeded. To avoid creating panic, his army encamped in nearby towns. He declared a general amnesty, restored municipal administration and public order. Tribunes convened the Senate. Caesar asked to appoint him dictator, but even in this situation was refused. Denied the Senate and in the request to send ambassadors to Pompey to make peace. However, Caesar without much obstacles was able to seize the state treasury. As noted by historians, only Tribune Lucius Metellus blocked his way, but relented when Caesar noted that he himself would rather strike than threaten anyone. The new ruler of Rome not only began to freely spend the treasury, but also replenished it with military booty. The danger of Italy's food isolation, provoked by Pompey, remained urgent, since Rome depended on supplies of overseas grain. Caesar sent the impetuous Curian to Sicily at the head of 2 legions. Sicily itself was taken without a fight. Cato surrendered the island and fled to Africa. But careless Curian overestimated himself and fell in battle, rushing to pursue Cato. Caesar, meanwhile, continued to consolidate power throughout the country. In order to secure the borders and resume food supplies, he brought troops into Spain, which recognized his authority. In the fall of that year, Caesar finally established himself in Gaul and returned to Rome by December. This time the Senate was more cooperative and declared Gaius dictator. However, already in 48 Caesar resigned this title in favor of the appointment of 1 consuls. Caesar proved that his talents are not limited to military accomplishments. The emerging financial crisis in the country was stopped through the revaluation of debt interest, a ban on debt slavery and a number of other urgent and successful reforms. At the same time, conservatives insisted on a complete redistribution of wealth and the cessation of debts. Despite his political successes, Pompey remained the sword of Damocles hanging over Caesar's power. A fleet of Pompeians patrolled the Mediterranean, and an army captured the rich Dorichium in the Adriatic. However, all of Pompey's achievements were offset by his own indecision. Thus, Caesar failed in the transportation of his army across the Adriatic. Units were split. The ships were caught in a storm. The soldiers were starving. Pompey did not take advantage of a great chance to put an end to the war, moving the army on sharply weakened enemy legions. Meanwhile, Caesar's supporter, Mark Antony, managed to cross the sea the entire army. Caesar attacked Pompey, but was repulsed. However, the winner once again failed to capitalize on his victory. Against the advice of his commanders, he executed all the prisoners, while Caesar spared the captured enemy soldiers. Caesar's authority in his own army increased tremendously. Morale in the army of Pompey has fallen just as much. The execution of Roman citizens made a depressing impression on the legionaries. Caesar meanwhile retreated safely to Thessaly to give the army a break. Pompey's next decision cost him his life. Instead of going to virtually unprotected Italy and return power in Rome to the Senate and the Republicans, Pompey decided to get even with the enemy and rushed in pursuit of Caesar. Perhaps such a rash decision was caused by the desire to preserve the reputation of a great commander and not be accused of cowardice. The historical battle was fought at Pharsalus, modern Thessaly. Watching the battle, the aristocracy was amazed at the extreme to which Italy was brought by the vanity of rulers. Recently all of Rome was ready to unite before the threat of Hannibal. And today the best citizens of the country are fighting each other for money and power. Pompey had 48,000 infantry and 7,000 horsemen, Caesar 22,000 and 1,000 respectively. It seemed that the outcome of the battle was predetermined, but Caesar was serious about winning. Legionaries were ordered to spare all surrendered enemies and, among other things, to make every effort to capture the young aristocrat Marcus Brutus. The battle was lost by Pompey. However, this is not the first and not the last case, when the battle is won not by the number of soldiers, and their fighting spirit and the talent of the commander. 15,000 Pompeians remained on the battlefield, more than 20,000 surrendered. Caesar, as he himself later wrote, lost only 200 soldiers, but most likely he is lying or counted only representatives of noble families. Surviving Brutus fled to Larissa, from where he himself wrote to Caesar, after which he was forgiven by him. Caesar never regretted the leniency, even if it cost him his life in the future. Pompey fled to Alexandria, where his story ended. Pothinus, the chief advisor to the young Egyptian king Ptolemy XII, ordered the death of Pompey, probably counting on the gratitude of Caesar. When Julius himself arrived in Egypt and was presented with the head of the executed, he only recoiled in horror and wept. The great commander until the last moment was ready to forgive his former friend and sworn enemy. Shocked by the cruelty of local authorities, Caesar decided to stay in Egypt and take part in the political life of the ancient kingdom. And things in Egypt were extremely difficult. After the death of King Ptolemy VI of Egypt, who traced his lineage back to the time of Alexander the Great, the country was rapidly declining. The kings could neither maintain social order nor defend the interests of the state. Huge influence on Egyptian politics had the Senate of Rome. In Alexandria was stationed Roman legion. According to the will of Ptolemy XI Go, put on the throne by Pompey and Gabinius, power passed to his son Ptolemy XII Go and daughter Cleopatra, now known no less than Caesar himself. Cleopatra was a Macedonian Greek, a highly educated woman and an excellent administrator. At the same time, an Oriental sensual woman, able to ruthlessly punish enemies and charm friends. Fearing the power of Cleopatra, Potin ordered the expulsion of the young king's sister and actually ruled Egypt himself. Caesar was extremely dissatisfied with this state of affairs. He ordered to secretly find and deliver Cleopatra in Alexandria and from the first moments of acquaintance was fascinated by her. He woke up that young hustler, about the love affairs of which earlier talked about all of Rome. Caesar reconciled sister and brother and returned Cleopatra place on the throne. The further fate of the vizier Potin was predictable. He was killed for organizing an assassination attempt on Caesar, but it did not spare neither the Roman commander, nor Cleopatra from other difficulties. The Egyptian commander Achilles, being in collusion with Potin, prompted the army to revolt against the Romans. Gaius Julius remained in Alexandria with a small detachment of Roman soldiers. Sending for backup legions, he turned the city into a fortress and successfully held the defense. As a result of desperate sorties, the Romans were able to capture and hold the island of Pharos to ensure the passage of ships into Alexandria harbor, and when the legions arrived, the Egyptian rebels were destroyed in the Battle of the Nile. Cleopatra henceforth became the supreme ruler of Egypt. Having established order in Egypt, Caesar himself was not without reward. Cleopatra gave birth to a son named Caesarion, and the great Roman recognized him. Perhaps in dreams Cleopatra saw marriage with the Roman ruler and a single state, ruling over the entire Mediterranean. Fate ordered otherwise. Having rested in Egypt, Caesar again went to war. Now he had to pacify the rebellious East Greek commander Pharnac conquered Pontus, Armenia and Cappadocia. In Rome, meanwhile, was turbulent. For almost 2 years of Caesar's absence in the city again began a desperate struggle for power. Pompeians in Africa gathered an army, not inferior to the broken at Pharsalus. Pompey's son Sextus was preparing a revolt in Spain. Caesar returned to Rome with Cleopatra and spent several months to restore order, after which he was again proclaimed dictator and began to prepare for the next campaign. This time to Africa. The African campaign didn't last long. Caesar's legions were first overturned by the combined forces of Mettal Scipio, Cato, Labienna and Juba. But the Roman dictator quickly rebuilt his army and in the second battle inflicted a crushing defeat on his opponents. The era of the Roman Revolution and Civil War was almost over. In 46, Gaius Julius Caesar was proclaimed dictator for 10 years. In fact, he was a monarch, as the dictatorship was declared to be for life. He single-handedly set about rebuilding the state, as he had failed to win the support of the Roman aristocracy. Immediate reforms were necessary. The years of revolution and civil war had ravaged and bankrupted Rome. Caesar took control of the treasury and the priesthood, could make laws and enforce them in the Senate, appoint and depose senators. He expanded the Senate, even inviting the leaders of conquered Gaul. As part of the state and financial reforms under Caesar, a census was conducted, tax, debt and family law were changed. Julius also showed high religious tolerance, remaining the high priest and donating funds for the restoration of temples. He allowed the previously forbidden cult of Isis and supported the Jews in preserving their religion. Under Caesar, a new calendar, the Julian calendar, was created because the old one was seriously at odds with the seasons. But despite effective reforms, Caesar was let down by his most unpopular policy to unite the middle class and plebs and native Romans with yesterday's barbarians. During his political and military career, Caesar conquered more than one summit, displaying his talents as a military leader and reformer. Like Alexander the Great, he did not know how to stop at what he had accomplished. Having built a new Roman kingdom, he dreamed of a campaign against Parthia and Scythia, of exploring the Danube and conquering Germany. His great goal was to create the Roman world, extending to all horizons of known geography and uniting different countries and peoples. Fate had it otherwise. Looking beyond the horizon, Caesar did not notice the danger at his side. The Roman aristocracy hated Caesar for his elevation, for reforms, but most importantly, they could not forgive him magnanimity and lenient attitude to his enemies. Julius spared all his yesterday's enemies, honored Cicero, entrusted the management of provinces Brutus and Cassius. But it is as difficult to forgive another what he dares to forgive as it is to forgive those whom we have done injustice to. It did not take long for the accumulated hatred of Caesar to take the forms of a conspiracy. A group of aristocrats led by Gaius Cassius, in collusion with senators and major magnates, decided to get rid of the lifelong Roman dictator. To give weight to the assassination, to the conspiracy involved Marcus Brutus, a descendant of an ancient family that had expelled the Roman kings many centuries ago and established the Republic. Of course, such symbolism was only to the conspirators' advantage. Gaius Julius Caesar was killed March 15, 44 in the building of the Senate. As legends say, Caesar was repeatedly warned about the conspiracy, but did not attach importance to it. However, perhaps, after all the experience, he treated life with extreme fatalism and was ready to give his fate at the discretion of the gods. So ended his life one of the greatest people not only of the ancient era, but also the entire history of mankind. He wanted to become the second Alexander, but he became the first Caesar. He was killed by the hand of his enemies, whom he spared, but amazing accomplishments in the military, state and even literary fields made him immortal. Caesar forever remains Caesar for history, and Cassius and Brutus, only those who killed Caesar.